All right, and at 8:33 p.m. on June 14th, 2021, we'll call to order the special joint meeting of the Easton, Reading, and Region 9 Boards of Education, and also call to order the Reading Board of Education, seeing present for the Reading Board, Heather Whaley, Colleen Pilato, Mike Hoffman, John Riley, and myself. And I believe absent is Mr. Hocker, and coming in right now is Steph Alton, which gives us 6 members. And I'll ask John and Todd to please call their boards to order.
Thank you. Call to order the Easton Board of Education at 8:33 p.m. Members in attendance, and bear with me just a moment. It's Jeff Parker, Devin Weibel, Randy Hicks, John Stinson, and I believe Jenny is not currently here, but she's on the way. So I'm just going to double check. That's right. So Jenny is not quite here yet.
All right, now I'll call Region 9 to order at 8:34, and members present that I see: Cheryl Graziano, Mike D'Agostino, Juliet Berry, Gwen Denny, Mary Lee Pompel, Maureen Williams, myself, and we're missing Karen Ryan, I believe. So we have a quorum.
So there's quorum from all 3 boards, and from the administration, I see Dr. Harrison, Dr. Pearson-Ugall, and Mr. Zachary, which brings us to the first item on the agenda, which is public comment. Members of the public wishing to comment, please indicate so by raising your hand using the reactions tool on Zoom. I see Jenny coming in. John for Easton.
Thank you.
And
8:34.
And I see no members of the public wishing to be heard, which brings us to board member comment. Any members of any of the boards wishing to comment this evening? Seeing none, we'll right on to item 4A, which is Central Office Administrator Contracts. And I will ask John Stinson, the chair of the Joint Negotiating Committee, to lead this discussion, please.
Thank you, Chris. We want to just start by laying out the process and make sure that everyone understands the process that we went through. We do have the possibility of jumping into executive session because I do believe that there could be some value, and I'll leave it to the members here to sort of talk about that, whether or not we want to jump into executive session. The value would be to discuss our strategy going into it and make sure that we're clear on sort of where we're signaling and what the strategy of that work was as we looked at the draft documents and sort of came together on what we're hoping to approve tonight. Now, to be clear, what we're hoping to approve tonight is Dr. Rydell Harrison and Dr. Stephanie Pearson-Ugall's contracts. We've had conversations with all 3 administrators. I think the conversation is continuing. We're just waiting to get a copy of the contract to Mr. Zachary and giving him the opportunity to just sort of consider it over time. And then obviously hoping, of course, that we can come to an agreement and then bring back to the boards for authorization for the board chairs to sign. Are there any basic questions about what our goal is tonight before I jump into a little bit of the process that we used? Okay. All right, good.
John, while there's a break, I would just note that Karen has joined us at 8:36.
Thank you. Goal, let's, hoping that we can get authorization to approve those 2 contracts. The process that we went through, so we have not always sort of gone through this process in this way. So let this be the year of many firsts. But we think what we've come up with in the process that we went through with the Joint Negotiating Committee was a process to clean up, to make more transparent, and ideally to streamline this for the future. So we started with looking at the 3 executive contracts in central office. Those 3 contracts had been put together over many years as a sort of Frankenstein's monster, a little bit of this and a little bit of this, and a conversation that goes this way and that way. And what that ended up with was a set of documents that didn't necessarily make sense when you put them together and think about the Easton Reading Region 9 remit to sort of share these resources. And so when we sort of went through that process, we spent many hours just reviewing and coming up with like, what is the strategy that we should be using going forward as we think about these contracts? And that led us to a place where we essentially took every clause, every piece of information there where there's some agreement in any of the contracts and put them into a spreadsheet. And we just went through this process of trying to draft out, is there language for vacations? Yes, there is. Okay, what does it say? If all three executives and soon to be a fourth executive are getting 25 vacation days, well, then why does it say it this way here and say it this way here and say it this way here? If it's in fact the exact same language and agreement, let's just come to a place where that all lines up. Or in another contract, there was no mention of holidays, and in one there was. So just going through even things as mundane as, if there's a disagreement about this contract, what is the jurisdiction? Which state has jurisdiction? In some places there was no language for that. In others it was up here in the contract, and others it was down here. So we've tried to just normalize that basic language and make sure that on the core set of sort of agreements that we think make sense for our senior executives in central office, that it's in the contract. What that leads us to is a place where the sort of core differentiators that we see in the future in these contracts is really along the lines of compensation. And so I think what that allows us to do in the future is have much more focused conversations on that, instead of all of the, wait, I don't really understand what's here or there or whatever. Like we have a much better handle on that. Additionally, it is our strong recommendation that we have these conversations much earlier in the year. We are having these conversations in June, and it is our preference. And we're having these conversations months after the central office budget has been approved by our boards. It's not a huge driver of the central office budget, but it's in the budget. It would be better for us to be able to have these conversations to come up with our numbers for what we think the right amount of increase, what the right decisions are for these contracts before we finalize the central office budget. So we would hope to have these conversations in the sort of December timeframe going forward, which would mean we'd be back and looking at these contracts again in December of this year. So any questions on any of that?
John, how do we make that happen? I love the suggestion about moving the conversation up earlier in the year. How do we make sure that is executed?
The first step to making it happen is having a hope to make it happen. Step two is put it on the calendar, right? So we've spent a significant amount of time with Dr. Harrison looking at all the things that we know happens every year and just trying to put them on the calendar and saying, where are the places that we've got something on the calendar that just doesn't make sense? This was one of those issues. So we have it on a calendar. I think we need to, get to the point where if we are all nodding and saying, yes, we agree, that makes sense, that the December, sort of meeting schedule needs to include a tri-board meeting where we're sort of approving this, or the January meeting could be the approval meeting, and the December is the negotiating committee needs to discuss. I'll look for feedback. Anyone thinks differently about that? Yeah. Okay. So December negotiating committee needs to be meeting, and January sort of a meeting of all three boards needs to happen to review and approve. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's a good answer. But okay. Also, like, who does that? Who's going to do that?
So, the meeting that would happen in December would be a function of the chair of the joint negotiating committee to call that meeting. So that's me, and to get people together and sort of have the conversations with the administrators. Then I'd be happy to notice that meeting right now, right? Like let's get on the calendar and sort of, by the only way that we could not have that meeting is if we go in and cancel it.
Don, does that affect this year's contracts in any way though, moving the date? Okay.
No, so it wouldn't. We would still be talking about the sort of the next budget year contracts. That's a really good question though, because it could be a little bit confusing. We're talking December about something that really doesn't take effect until July 1.
John, these are more process questions that apply generally. So, is the chair of the joint negotiating committee always the person that would be chairing the tri-board meeting, or is that kind of to be assigned? No. And that might be the governance committee work question, right?
Yeah, totally separate. I think somebody asked who wants to be the chair of the joint negotiating committee, and everybody else took a step back. I think that's the main way that, no, I joke, but I raised my hand and I said, hey, yeah, I'm willing to take on this work. It really matters to me that we get this stuff right. And so raised my hand to do that. I think I would be the chair as long as I'm the chair of that negotiating committee, which I don't think that we have I don't think we have any schedule to refresh that vote anytime soon.
I think
Well,
that's
first-
part of the governance work.
It is part of the governance work where we're recommending that we do refresh that, but I don't know if that plan would be that it happens before December.
Well, thank you, John. I guess the second question is, how does this timing of the negotiation of the quantified salary increase relate to the actual performance evaluation of the superintendent?
Yeah, and they're not connected, but of course they're somewhat connected. There's always this sort of tension between sort of the performance evaluation and the sort of compensation conversation. So what I would say is, for our purposes tonight, they're absolutely different, totally separate conversations. I would say in the future, and a big part of in my mind, the calendaring question, I think we should be doing those evaluations, a sort of lightweight version of the evaluations on a regular basis, at least twice a year, where we're checking in, we're saying, how are we doing? Are we on track? What are the things that matter to us as boards, for the superintendent to be doing those check-ins with the senior staff as well on a regular basis. But if we're having the negotiating conversations in December, we should be looking at how do we feel we've been doing so far for the year? And then, that should sort of the work that we do in probably April, May, where we're doing the sort of the full superintendent evaluation and understanding the evaluations of other senior staff, that we need to have a memory for that, so that, we are recognizing this is a performer who continues to perform. So I wish it could be clean and we could just say, this has nothing to do with that, but that's just not the case. We understand that when we come in, especially when we have a lot of history under our belt and we see a star performer that we want to figure out ways to compensate appropriately, like there's always going to be some overlap of those things.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Mike.
Yeah, so just so we're clear, that the superintendent's evaluation and the contract, they're linked, but directly or indirectly, however you want to classify it. The superintendent's evaluation is a legal obligation of the board statutorily. So something that we have to do each year, and typically it's done in June. So that's something that we have to do, that we will do. But obviously, because of the budgetary impacts, the contracts and all that stuff really should be decided at the joint boards meeting in January, so that they can be put into the operating budget. So they are connected. I think that just comes down to boards having an awareness of what was in the evaluation the previous year, and it's kind of a continuation, and the budget, the contract for the next year would be based on the evaluation or the performance from the previous year. So I think they're connected, but the timing has to be sequenced because of the budgetary impacts. So.
Yep. I'll also add, and I don't want to speak to corporate speak, but I do think that this is informative to the overall thing, right? So when in the corporate world, when we're talking about compensation and the connection to performance, there's a component of your performance absolutely has a connection. However, it's also about the sort of financial health of the institution, the specific contributions of sort of this group for the overall institution, the economy at large, et cetera. So could we have rock star performance and really want to do that, and yet our towns are in very bad financial, which is not the case, but could that happen? Yes. And in that scenario, we wouldn't necessarily be able to sort of do all the things we want to do in the compensation space, but like that's, there are more than one factor at play there. So, Chris, did you have something?
No, go ahead. I was just going to suggest that if there are no other questions about the process at this point, we'd kind of be at the crossroads between
Right.
My understanding is all board members have received a copy of the draft contracts at this point, and if they wanted to take it, if anybody wanted to have a discussion in executive session about the draft terms of that agreement, we could entertain a motion to do that. Otherwise, we'd be looking for a motion to approve the contracts. I would tend towards thinking that it might be beneficial to have a brief executive session to make sure that there are no questions from anybody, or anybody feels comfortable saying whatever they'd like to about the drafts, but I would leave that to the boards.
Sure, I'll move. We go to executive session.
Okay. So I think that the motion that we would be looking for is a motion to move to executive session to discuss the draft contracts with regard to compensation and benefits for senior central office personnel. Randy, is that the motion you're making?
Absolutely, John. Thank you. Yep.
And do I have a second in Easton?
Hold on, can you do the adding or inviting rather? Can you add that piece where you invite?
I don't think we're inviting anybody.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're just bring ourselves in for the purpose of discussing the strategy for the draft documents.
Right. So that was Randy's motion. I saw Karen's hand up, but looking for an Easton second.
Easton second. Thank you, Jeff. Sorry, Jenny. I saw Jeff. Thank you. Good. All right.
Competitive seconding. Anybody in Reading make the same motion?
I'll make the motion for Reading. I'll second.
Mike second. John. Todd, Region 9.
And Region 9,
Moved.
same motion. Maureen,
Did Karen.
and second Karen.
Any objection from any of the boards? If there's not, we'll deem all three motions approved by unanimous consent. I will momentarily turn off the live stream. Before that, we'll let you know that members of the public and non-members of the executive session will move